Her life story is right out of a romance novel, from rising to fame as the mistress of one of the most powerful men in the world to a fatal downfall during the French Revolution. Jeanne Bécu, later known as Madame du Barry, was of humble origin but managed to conquer the royal court and the French king's heart following the death of Madame de Pompadour. The life of King Louis XV's final mistress, Madame du Barry, is one of tragedy that has only recently begun to receive wider attention, thanks to the release of the movie Jeanne du Barry, starring Johnny Depp and Maïwenn. Jeanne Bécu was born on August 19th in Vaucouleurs, about 300 kilometers east of Paris. As the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress and possibly a friar, Jeanne spent her first years with her mother Anne at the estate of a wealthy army supplier who was also her mother's lover. Jeanne was sent off to a convent where she received a basic education, which was common for girls at the time. At the age of 15, Jeanne became a lady's companion for a wealthy widow. However, at that time she was already a great beauty with a lot of wit, which didn't go unnoticed by the widow's sons. It is assumed that Jeanne had an affair with both men, and soon her position at the estate was terminated. Jeanne's sorrow, however, was short-lived. Her known beauty had caught the attention of Jean de Barry, whose nickname was Le Roué, which can be translated as the Sly One. He was the black sheep of his noble family and was known in Paris as an avid gambler and some sort of noble pimp. Du Barry saw great potential in Jeanne and took her as his mistress. The couple drew attention everywhere they went, and Jeanne's beauty soon propelled her into the city's gaming salons, where she met many noblemen who were smitten with her. The number of affairs grew and grew, but Du Barry had bigger plans. He wanted to put Jeanne into the highest position possible for a lady of a kind, which was the Mistress en titre to the French king. To make her presentable, Du Barry coaxed his own brother into marrying Jeanne, which brought her the noble title she needed for Versailles. Now Comtesse du Barry, Jeanne was brought to court in 1769, where King Louis XV immediately noticed her. At the time, Louis XV had suffered many losses. He recently lost his wife Maria Leszczyńska, his official mistress Madame de Pompadour, and his son, the Dauphin. With a lot of sorrow, the 58-year-old king was longing for a new companion, and he found that in 25-year-old Jeanne. To be officially introduced to the court of Versailles, Jeanne needed an adequate sponsor. As there were no volunteers to introduce the woman of questionable descent, the Duke of Richelieu had to bribe Madame du Barry as Jeanne's sponsor in exchange for the payment of her considerable gambling debts. This carefully orchestrated ascent to wealth, fame, and crucially power was not well received by many courtiers. Jeanne's beauty and shady background incited jealousy and outrage. One of Madame du Barry's most vocal opponents was the Duke of Choiseul, the Secretary of State. A loyal supporter of Madame de Pompadour, he had ambitions to place his own sister in the king's favor, hoping to expand his influence at court. As this project had obviously failed, Choiseul went on plotting and agitating against Jeanne. With the support of his sister and the king's daughters, Choiseul managed to turn the new Dauphin, Marie Antoinette, against Madame du Barry. Marie Antoinette was now the first lady of the French court. The young Dauphin was easily influenced and decided to ignore Jeanne completely, which would lead to diplomatic tensions between France and the Austrian Empire. Eventually, Marie Antoinette gave in to her powerful mother Maria Theresa of Austria. On New Year's Day 1772, Marie Antoinette addressed Jeanne with the famous words, "There are a lot of people at Versailles today." With these few words, the domestic peace at Versailles was restored. In the meantime, the Duke of Choiseul had exhausted the king's goodwill. After acting arbitrary and against Louis's political agendas on top of continuing his vendetta against Jeanne, the Duke was expelled from court. While Madame du Barry had many opponents at court, she also made some genuine friends, including Voltaire, who valued her genuine character and kindness beside her influence on the king. Despite never forgetting where she came from, Madame du Barry enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. She was constantly showered with gifts, sat for numerous portraits by renowned artists, and received exquisite jewelry, including the notorious diamond necklace valued at around $14 million today. The king seemed to have been completely infatuated, as he provided her with multiple estates, including Chateau in Louveciennes, located about 8 kilometers from Versailles on the outskirts of modern-day Paris. Another so-called gift was her servant Samoa, who was ripped from his family in modern-day Bangladesh by British slave traders. While Jeanne doted on him, Zama would play a major role in her downfall later. Whilst Jeanne was completely out of touch with the hard life of the commoners, she did use her influence on the king usually for pleas of mercy. She neither had the intelligence nor the influence of her predecessor Madame de Pompadour, but she did make good use of her power by helping where she could, an uncommon trait at Versailles at the time. Life was great, but Jeanne's star at court was about to sink as King Louis fell severely ill. Eventually, it would turn out to be the pox. Instead of saving herself, Jeanne cared for the king in his last days and refused to leave his side until she was sent away. Following King Louis's death in 1774, Madame du Barry eventually retired to Louveciennes after spending 2 years in a convent as per Louis's order. After being cut off from court life and shunned by the new royal couple Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, Madame du Barry lived quietly off the wealth that had been granted to her by Louis XV. Even as a persona non grata, Jeanne had an active social life, as many friends and admirers stayed loyal to her. In her later years, Jeanne's focus was charity work in the surrounding area, while also maintaining some affairs, most notably with the Comte de Brissac. Life in Louveciennes was peaceful, however, France was becoming restless. After the new king and queen ascended the throne, the people of France were hopeful for a better future. However, the new sovereigns were completely overwhelmed and went on with business as usual, driving the almost bankrupt state into even more debt and poverty, which eventually led to the French Revolution in 1789. Jeanne, who was a bit naive when it came to politics, didn't realize the danger the revolution posed to her. When in 1791 her chateau was ransacked, she reported all her missing goods to the police. With this, she didn't only draw attention to her almost forgotten existence, but she also revealed her immense wealth. Eventually, her jewelry was found in England, which led Jeanne to travel back and forth to settle the matter. When in England, Jeanne would meet with many exiled French nobles, which would later be used as fatal evidence against her. In 1792, after the jailed king's failed attempt to flee, Jeanne's lover de Brissac was also arrested, and as an advisor to the king, he was sentenced to death. Instead of meeting his fate at the guillotine, he was butchered by a mob in the streets of Paris. Even though Jeanne was shocked by her lover's demise, she was determined to not only regain her stolen goods, but also to save Brissac's daughter's inheritance. In 1793, she traveled to England one last time. During his stay, King Louis XVI was executed. It is questionable why Jeanne decided to travel back to France afterwards. Unknown to her, a man with the name Georges Grief, a fanatic of the revolution, had made it his mission to prosecute Madame du Barry, who was the symbol of the lavish Ancien Regime. With the help of her servant Samo, Grief soon drafted an indictment against Jeanne. At first, the people of Louisiana stood with her benefactor, but after being bombarded with pamphlets about Jeanne's supposed crimes and deviancy, they would soon turn against her. On September 22, 1793, Jeanne du Barry was incarcerated. The now 50-year-old was said to have been caught completely off guard, as she didn't expect her people to turn against her. In the upcoming months, Jeanne tried to plead with the judge, offering all her wealth in return for mercy, but her fate was already sealed. On December 8, 1793, at the age of 50, Comtesse de Jeanne du Barry met her end at the guillotine, just 2 months after Queen Marie Antoinette faced the same grim fate. Her last words, as it was reported, were a poignant plea: "De grâce, Monsieur le Bourreau, encore un petit moment," which can be translated as, "Please, Mr. Executioner, just a little moment longer." This request encapsulated the tragedy of a life filled with beauty, power, and ultimately a tragic downfall amid the chaos of the French Revolution.